Hi there, welcome to the Johnny Jenkins Show, Friday, 3 o'clock. It's got to be part of your weekly routine by now. It's me, Johnny, here live across campus from my room. We've got a panel in a moment. They're all coming from their rooms across Leamington and campus and all the rest of it, because of course we're all adapting to this online way of learning. A blended approach is what the university calls it. I wonder if you're a student, and if you're watching this, you probably are, what's it been like for you, the end of week one? How much of your course is online? How much of it is in person? I have had, let me think, 3 lectures this week, all pre-recorded, which were quite nice. I could go at my own pace, pause, have lunch, sort of an hour lecture. It ended up taking me a whole afternoon. And I had one seminar this week. I had it this morning actually on Teams with all the people and muting and all that was going on. But it all seems to be going well so far. And it does seem to me, and I'm very pleased to say this, that it seems to me that the university does have a hold on things. It seems to be going okay, certainly from when I'm sitting. Maybe next week, when we all go into campus, we'll be talking about a different scenario and things might be a little bit different. But so far, so good. That's certainly from where I am. But as we look across to Westminster in the UK, and we look across the pond to America, and we see actually it's not all going too swimmingly there. So a few of the topics we've got on the agenda today. This time last week, I was telling you that Donald Trump had coronavirus, and I tell you what, it gave us quite a shock, didn't it, when we found out about that? And then, of course, loads of his contacts ended up getting coronavirus, and the White House seemed to be a hotbed for this ghastly disease. Since then, Donald Trump went to hospital last Friday night. He came out of hospital not long afterwards. He said he was immune, he was cured, he felt better than he did 20 years ago. He wasn't always wearing his face mask, wasn't always distancing from people. There's certainly plenty of people around. He wasn't in isolation. We now know he's working in the Oval Office, in that famous room. But shouldn't he still be in isolation? Hasn't he got another week? I wonder what you think about that. Is he irresponsible? Or is he fighting fit and strong and the president with an election in a month's time and he needs to get out there? Your thoughts, please, always welcome in the comments below. This government here in the UK has had a bit of a tough time with its test and trace system. We found out that they'd lost thousands of cases because they were using an outdated Excel spreadsheet. Now, it doesn't really matter what the numbers are at the end of the day. What matters is that these people know they're positive and they know that their contacts are traced so that we can bring the virus rate down. But all these people who had the virus weren't traced. And so all their friends and family were out there living their lives not knowing. Wouldn't you hate to be in that situation? And why has Serco, the company that run this, the government, the NHS, all these partners involved, why have they got it so wrong? Or maybe they're just doing the best they can and it all seems to be going okay from your point of view. And actually there are going to be a few teething problems, a few issues along the way, but it's all going okay. Thoughts, please, in the comments below. But something seems to be going right because the R number, that's the reproduction rate. So it tells you how many people each person passes the virus on to. So if the R rate is 2, then I pass it on to 2 more people. If the R rate is 1, I pass it on to 1 more people. Above 1 means it's accelerating, and below 1, it means it's diminishing. It's dipped ever so slightly this week. 1.2 to 1.5, I think, and last week it was 1.3 to 1.6. So we are seeing a dip in the rate of infection. That is some very good news, right? Or maybe these lower numbers are just a result of the test and trace fiasco. Thoughts, comment below. And the other topic on the agenda is, well, we're seeing in Scotland, in a sort of central belt of Scotland, new restrictions being brought in, pubs and restaurants closed for 16 days. This is called a circuit breaker. We were touting this a few weeks ago. A circuit breaker meaning you can sort of have a short, sharp lockdown to bring the infection rate down, and then it'll all be okay afterwards. Is Nicola Sturgeon doing this right? Or is she just getting it all wrong? Is she any better than the England government? And actually, on Monday, we expect to hear some more measures coming in for the northeast of England. Many of whom are already in lockdown, a local regional lockdown, having many of their freedoms curtailed. Are more freedoms of theirs going to be taken away? And is it right, as Boris Johnson says, we're a freedom-loving country and a freedom-loving nation? Is it right to take away all these freedoms, or are we at the point where actually we should just say, if you're ill, you're going to get it, and then if you're not, go and live your life? thoughts in the comments below, please. And it's at this point where we welcome our panel, who are going to tell me where they sit on these many fences, and I hope they are firmly on one side or the other. Let's bring in first our head of news, Enoch Mukungu, head of news at Raw. Enoch, hello, how you doing?
I'm good, Johnny, I'm good.
I'm very pleased to hear that. What's happening? How's your week been?
You know what? It's actually been weirdly relaxed because there's been nothing to do all week. After we had a politics seminar, a sign-up disaster on Monday, but other than that, I've just been.
Tell me about that disaster. What happened?
Well, the first thing that went wrong is instead of sending everyone the email, it got sent straight to everyone's trash cans. So no one was told when seminar sign-ups were going to open, and then we were told it would open at 9 o'clock. The website crashed, as it always does. And so we had to sign up at 12 instead. But no one was told the time moved. So we had to sort of randomly find our way there. And then once we did that, it turned out it was actually politics policy. You're supposed to have two face-to-face and one online. But no one was told this. So a bunch of people ended up being told, hey, you're supposed to have one online seminar. You've not signed up for one. And yeah.
Oh, dear. So other than that, what seems to be a bit of a drama on Monday, and hands up, I was in the same boat as you there. The week's been pretty chill, is it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's been nothing to do. I had one seminar.
Isn't week one always like this, though?
Oh, I feel like I remember last year, at least history had seminars in week one. Politics did it, but history had seminars. And you can really feel the lack of lectures now because there isn't just nothing. I just have nothing to do in my day anymore. Except Raw.
Okay. Well, of course, you're keeping busy with all these live streams. Is there a new podcast on the block?
Yes. Yeah, we launched the first episode of our new America-focused podcast, Elephants and Donkeys, which you can now find on any good podcast hosting website. Where it's just, me and some Warwick students break down all the stories you might have missed from the American election. Okay,
I like it. I look forward to hearing it. Let's talk now to Imogen, who is a first-year student. Hi, Imogen. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Very good to hear that. And now, tell me, you've been at Warwick 2 weeks now? What's it been
2 weeks on Sunday. So the Freshers Week just wasn't a conventional Freshers, and that security were everywhere, which is understandable, but also just meant it was so much harder to meet people, which is kind of what the whole experience is. And now quite a few flats have been put in isolation. So it's just slowly becoming more chaotic.
So talk to me about that Freshers Week then.
Yeah.
I think back to my Freshers Week. In the days, you sort of wake up late, chill out of your flat, go to society fair, go to events together, get to know each other fundamentally and meet other people. And then in the evening, you go to the Freshers parties, and there was pretty much one every night for that whole week. Talk me through a day of a fresher this year. What was it like?
So sort of try to do anything you can to occupy yourself during the day. And then in the evening, potentially go to the SU, but then that closes at 10. And then the flats tried to have parties, but they just got shut down by security and then were threatened with fines. So by the end, people just realised it just wasn't worth taking the risk. So there were a lot of sort of my flat itself tried to be sociable with one another, but it just meant that it was more isolating as opposed to meeting other people.
Lots of the SU put on these events, didn't they, like online DJ sets and things like that?
Yeah.
Did you attend any of them?
No, they're just not the same. And it was the same with like societies fair and sports fair. They tried to hold meetings on Teams and things, which I think some worked, but it doesn't compare at all.
So the question, Imogen, is, do you think you made the right decision coming to Warwick?
Well, I already had a gap year, so I just wanted to start straight away. And I think so because we're still able to learn and meet new people. It's just in a slightly different way.
And then, a degree is longer than one term or 2 terms. There's so much more to it.
And it's still nice.
I'm very sorry for talking over you there.
That's okay. It's just still nice being able to do something other than just staying at home.
Yeah, well, it's very good to see you today, Imogen, and thanks ever so much for joining us on the show. And we welcome now a friend of the show, Noah Keate. Hello, Noah.
Hello, Johnny. Thank you very much for having me. I think this is the first time I've been on your show this term, so it shows that the university term is well and truly underway if you're back on air.
Well, exactly. What was your summer like then, Noah?
Well, it was if you think about the summer, it almost sort of stretched from March to when I went back home. I was able to sort of, go out and about eventually after the main lockdown period had ended. I was able to go to a brilliant journalism school in Twickenham, so I had a bit of time away from home. But it was definitely a different summer. And it showed me that, I was definitely ready to come back to uni and to Leamington from the start of September.
And what do you make of the uni's handling of everything so far? Because I was saying at the start of the show that I was a little bit worried coming back. I wasn't quite sure how it was all going to work. Wasn't sure that it was going to be handled well. From where I sit, it seems to, fingers crossed, be going okay so far. Your thoughts?
Well, I think it's been a real mixture. Like Enoch was talking about, the seminar sign-up was a complete disaster and completely predictive. You were going to have 20,000 people signing up for their seminars at the same time, and signing up for their modules too. So always going to be sort of technical issues. For Freshers Week, obviously, as Imogen was saying, it wasn't the same. But I know that there are other universities like Birmingham University that were doing lots of outdoor events, and so they were trying to replicate the Freshers Week as best they could with social distancing and allowing for an element of socialization. And those sort of online DJ events just really wouldn't be the same. But other parts of the university, I think they've coped really well. So for societies, last week I attended 2 films at the student cinema, and I thought the team there managed it really well in terms of social distancing, wearing a mask in the lecture theatre where they showed the film, and I thought that went really well. So it has been a mixed bag really, which is what you'd expect.
It's weird walking around campus, and I must admit I've only been there a few times. I haven't been there at all this week. And you go in the buildings and you see people wearing masks, and I suppose it's good that they're being careful, but it is just a bit peculiar. You went to see a film wearing one, Noah. Did you feel sort of restricted by it, or were you quite happy to sort of, make that sacrifice?
Yeah, I didn't notice it that much in the film, I think, because the films I went to see were very good. So hence my attention was on that. Where I noticed it more was when I did a bit of work in the library last week, and I could sense, as I was trying to sort of work away, like write an article or do a bit of research, I could sense, the mask was distracting in that way. And I thought I could be doing this in my room at home without wearing a mask at all. So I noticed it more there, where I was having to sort of concentrate academically rather than when I was doing something for leisure, where it didn't feel like much of a hassle at all. But yeah, when I went onto campus last week, while it was nice having the sort of bus to myself, just myself and the bus driver, actually on campus, there were some freshers out and about, which I was pleased to see, but it was a fraction of what we'd all enjoyed last year, and for you, Johnny, the year before.
And what film did you see?
I saw on Wednesday evening, I saw Misbehaviour, which was a brilliant political film, because I'm into that sort of thing, about some feminist activists that rebelled against the Miss World competition. And it was like back in the 1970s, so a really long time ago. And then on Friday last week, I saw a Christopher Nolan film, but not Tenet, which has been the main one released in cinemas, but Interstellar, which is about sort of outer space. I'm not usually into sort of outer space films, but I was very moved by it. The sort of cinematography is brilliant. But I know this isn't a film review show, so I'll stop that there.
Well, it's not, because I'm not the biggest film watcher, because I just get so bored. I know it's bad.
You've got short attention span, Johnny. You need to...
I mean, I'm saying that I pause my lecture to go and make my lunch. I want to be able to do that of a film.
No, you have to watch it in a cinema. Like I watch films on a laptop, and it's not the same. You have to see it in a cinema where you just sort of have no distraction at all, and you can't look at your phone. Otherwise, everyone else in the cinema will just sort of stare you down in anger.
I see, my life revolves around distractions, Noah, so that's why I'm not the biggest fan. It's very pleasing to see you all here today on the Johnny Jenkins Show. And if you're watching, you've got some thoughts on the topics we discussed, then you can comment below. And as you do that, we flash them up on the screen like that. And then we can see all of your thoughts, and you can get just as involved in the show as our panel today. And if perhaps you're watching this and you'd like to get involved with Raw, or I'd like to be on a panel show, then there's Facebook groups for that. Just search for Raw 20, what year is it? 2020, 2021, and you'll find all the opportunities in there. Here we are, back to the panel. Let's start with the election and everything going on in America. So Enoch, coming to you first, we had this this time last week. You were telling me on this show about how Donald Trump had coronavirus. Talk me through some of the timeline of the past week and how we got to where we are today.
Yeah, well, the confirmed timeline that we have is that Hope Hicks, one of Donald Trump's senior aides, she discovered she had coronavirus on the Thursday after the big debate with Joe Biden. Donald Trump himself got tested that night, and his results announced the next morning that he and his wife have coronavirus. Since then, we've seen multiple members of the senior team, including the press secretary, developed coronavirus. Donald Trump was hospitalized, and he's returned to the White House, but he's still believed he's being medicated. And we now are seeing he suggested delaying the debates, the big debates with Joe Biden, and in fact pulled out temporarily as he was now trying to get back in. So I think that's the big events we've seen in the last week.
And is that because there's too many flies around in the debating room? Talk to me about the vice presidential debate, because there was one the other day.
Yeah. Well, the vice presidential debate was sort of what you expect. The most boring thing in the entire world, but it was nice to see some actual serious policy discussion going on. But of course, the big star, as Johnny mentioned, there was the fly that landed on Mike Pence's head for I think almost we're an absurd length of time about being swatted away. And it's almost sort of took us back to 2015 when all these random things happen at political events. People make hundreds of Twitter accounts about them and start being, oh, look at this, the real star of the show, which is a nice departure from the misery of 2020 politics.
Because the first debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, which was last week, wasn't it? It feels like a lifetime ago. It was just the worst debate in the world. It was just impossible. I watched it all, and I watched it at the start of the day, and I just felt depressed the whole rest of the day. But is there going to be, and we'll get to the panel in a moment, but Enoch, is there going to be another debate between the two candidates?
I think there's going to have to be. Donald Trump has already given up on his pretense that he wasn't going to take part in them. He can't afford to give Joe Biden the space to just talk on his own, unrestrained. And with the way Trump's polling now, CNN had one poll from 16 points down compared to Joe Biden. He needs these debates to try and rebuild some momentum and try and convince people he can still do the job. So I think he's going to have to go back to him.
So Imogen, this time last week, Donald Trump got coronavirus. He went to hospital. He said he feels wonderful, and now he's back in the Oval Office. Is this a strong president showing resilience, or is this irresponsible?
I think it probably keeps morale up quite well. What was it he said? He doesn't have DNA, he has just USA or something. Yeah. And so I think it keeps morale up, definitely, considering they've had such a tough time. But at the same time, it is just so ignorant. And to just carry on as normal and not follow the quarantining rules. So it's probably not really a surprise that the White House had more cases than New Zealand at one stage, but it's just typical him, really.
But there is an election going on. There's an election coming up in a month. For Donald Trump to spend 2 weeks of such an important election campaign hiding away in isolation or in a bunker, that wouldn't be productive for his campaign, would it?
No, but then Mike Pence could go for him and campaign as well instead of just Donald Trump. And he does so much of his campaigning online through Twitter anyway, which is where lots of his followers come from and voters, that he probably could keep his voter base through the White House still.
And do you think that the next week, because he's tweeted to say it would be a waste of his time doing a debate over Zoom or whatever, do you think that next week he should debate Joe Biden?
They're not really debates anyway. They're just sort of personal attacks, which could again take place absolutely anywhere.
But should we have the shouting match?
I suppose it's part of the sort of culture now. And actually, maybe if they were online via Zoom or somewhere, it could be more beneficial because they can't interrupt each other, as they could just be muted or paused.
Because Noah, we would have this mute button, and I imagine as a moderator in these debates, that is the thing you are longing for. Your thoughts, Noah? Should we have a debate this week?
I think there definitely should be a debate, and I think they really do have a purpose within American politics and American history. If you think they've taken place since the 1960s, so they are an intrinsic part, even when it does descend into a shouting match. So we saw between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, we actually saw a far more sort of restrained and measured approach between Kamala Harris and Mike Pence. So it's a damning message of their debate. If the thing that gets most attention is a fly on Mike Pence's hair. I thought really interesting point about the vice presidential debate. The main bit I took away from it was about Supreme Court judges and whether the Democrats, if they got into office, would want to increase the number of Supreme Court judges from 9. And I think that's really important because the Supreme Court in the US just has a whole level of influence that it doesn't get within the UK. It's the Supreme Court that decided that, abortion would be made legal in 1973. So it has a real influence on these issues. And therefore, if Trump is able to get his nominee in and then the Democrats manage to win in November, that would be really significant. But as for Donald Trump, I think we have to remember that he's not a strong president. He's shallow, self-centered and narcissistic. He likes to be seen. We've known that since he presented The Apprentice as a successful, in inverted commas, businessman before becoming president. His whole campaign in 2016 was about him, his message and his ideas. That's how he was able to win in those Republican primary conventions back then and then eventually get the nominee. So I think he'll want to be seen out and about and he won't want to be in isolation. But I think it is really shameful of him that he won't take part in a virtual debate on Zoom. I think he made a remark about being cut off, so it just shows that he feels he wouldn't be able to interrupt, and that the power of his political arguments alone aren't strong enough, and that he needs to be seen to be forceful against Joe Biden, even though actually both of them are quite weak in their different ways.
Is it because you then, Noah, that if he's in the room with Joe Biden and the moderator, that he still has the power? No matter what the moderator says, no matter what Joe Biden says, he can still talk and he can still be heard. If we're doing it like this, I can just press this button and now we can't hear Noah anymore because I've decided to mute him. And if I was the moderator, I'd be doing that on Donald Trump quite a lot. Do you think it's because he loses the power?
Yeah, I'm sure you've been tempted to mute the microphone quite a few times when I've spoken. I think Donald Trump definitely likes having the power to get whatever debate he wants. He wants to be able to, make those personal attacks, personal remarks. I think someone said he interrupted Joe Biden over 70 times in that first debate, and there is only so much a moderator can do, especially when you have to, address Donald Trump as Mr. President. That level of authority, who has the power, is really clear, and it shows that from Trump's campaign team's perspective, the debate and not to have serious policy discussions and arguments about the future of America. It is just a way to get their message across to the voters, many of whom will have already made up their minds.
No, I love that you have a fireplace in your room.
Oh yeah,
well,
yeah, I know. Yeah,
does it work?
No, unfortunately not, but it's a nice aesthetic feature. So I'd rather have my sort of bookshelves behind me, but unfortunately they're up here, so you can't see the sort of book spines. Which I guess, I'm very pleased with it.
Oh, I promise I was listening to what you were saying.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad that you pay attention to my political analysis.
And so we're talking about debates there now, but actually there's this wider conversation, as I was having with Imogen, of is the president being reckless by going about in the Oval Office working just a week on from his COVID diagnosis. I understand it's a very, very difficult decision to make this close to an election. But if you were President Trump, slap on the fake tan, have a few burgers and get your Twitter out, what would you do?
Yeah, I'd rather not imagine I was President Trump. But thinking about what he wants to do, I think he wants to ensure that a Republican wins the 2020 elections. And part of him may almost not care if the election ends up killing him, if it means that, Mike Pence can become president and that socially conservative vision of America triumphs over what Joe Biden has to offer. But we've seen him be reckless time and time again, even before he officially got coronavirus. But since getting it, when he went out in that bulletproof car to wave at all his supporters, with all his drivers there, when he delivered a speech after leaving the medical center without a face mask. And I think he really thinks this election is what comes first. Almost my personal health and the health of those around me is a secondary priority, that I'm going to go and campaign. So I think he's off to, I think the debate was meant to be in Florida, but he's definitely probably going to go after those swing states that are going to be pivotal in whether he's re-election or not. And as Enoch was saying, with all the polls showing Joe Biden so far ahead, I think Trump feels he has to throw everything that he's got at this campaign, whatever the medical consequences.
Let's talk about those polls, because the national polls in the States show Joe Biden pretty much leaps ahead at this point. But we know it's all about just a few key swing states, bellwether seats, we might call them if we were in the UK. Imogen, what do you reckon to this idea that it's Biden's to lose, he's far ahead, he's going to win? Weren't we just saying the same thing about Hillary Clinton 4 years ago, and then Trump stormed through? I suppose the question is Trump going to win?
There are so many factors about it, and also because of the Electoral College, it's not just as simple as winning the popular vote. And I think Trump's argument will be that if he doesn't win, because that's all that he really cares about, he'll blame it on the coronavirus, and there have been all of the articles about how he'll just blame it on not being able to campaign, and so making it an illegal election. And so I don't think it will be easy to predict at all.
But go on, make a prediction.
I think because of what's gone on, and normally there are always more Democratic voters, but they don't always turn out. But now, because this year has been so sort of tumultuous and more difficult, that perhaps they will turn out. And so it will be in Biden's favour.
Okay, I think we elicit a Biden will win out of that. Enoch, we move up one to Enoch. The polls, should we be trusting them? Will it just make Democratic voters complacent?
Well, I think if I was a Democrat, I would be doing everything I could to be like, ignore the polls, just go vote as if Joe Biden is 12 points down. But I think everything we've been sort of hearing from GOP internal polls and Democrat internal polls indicates that they think Trump is on course for a historic loss. Looking at numbers that we haven't seen since maybe Ronald Reagan was running against Paul Walter Mondale. As you said, Hillary had a pretty good poll lead, not as good as Joe has, but a pretty good one, and she still lost. Unlikely events can still happen, but I think it is Joe Biden's game to lose here.
Okay, pretty confident there from Enoch, and I just looked down and see Noah. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I still think Donald Trump could and will win it. I've thought it ever since, I thought it before the 2016 election. I've thought it ever since he won. Obviously, this polling is really, really dire for him. It is, Imogen was talking about, it's not just the popular vote, it is about where you win those votes. So if Joe Biden wins loads and loads of votes in New York and California, that's irrelevant because they're safe Democrat states. It will be all about those swing states like Florida. And I really fear that you could see a repeat of 2000 where Al Gore, the Democrat candidate, won the popular vote, but George Bush, the Republican candidate, was just ahead in that key state of Florida. And it was the Supreme Court by a 5-4 margin that said that recounts in Florida had to stop. And so that meant that George Bush became president instead of Al Gore. So I fear it could be on the basis of a conservative majority in the Supreme Court that Donald Trump is able to win a second term. I seriously hope he doesn't, but I really think he could.
It's not my job to tell you who I want to win, but who I think will win. I'm with you now. I think it's Donald Trump's election to lose, but who knows? A few more weeks, I'm sure we'll return to this discussion. Now, I want to talk a little bit about a story that I discovered just as we were going on air. My phone buzzed at 3 p.m. to tell me that Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, has announced an expansion of the job support scheme. Now, panel, I don't expect you to know an awful lot about this because I'm probably telling you about it for the first time. But employees who work for firms in the UK that are forced to shut by law, so Scottish bars, restaurants that at the moment they're being closed, will get 2/3 of their wages paid for by government. So not quite the 80% we saw at the furlough scheme. But if you are told to close, you don't have a choice in the matter, and you have to close, be it a restaurant, pub, whatever, or maybe a theatre, 2/3 will be paid by the government. Not quite the 80% we saw, but we're seeing, what's that, 66.66666%. Enoch, let's get some immediate reaction from you there. Has the Chancellor Rishi Sunak done enough to save his reputation?
I mean, yeah, it's not been a good week for Rishi Sunak. I mean, he sort of had a great summer being able to help out, but he's made some real bumbling comments this week. I mean, looking at the end of furlough, very soon it's going to be a lot of angry people realizing they have no money left. I think this is a good first step, but I think through this entire crisis, government's not done enough to help support people, like self-employed people, for example. And I just don't see how this addresses them and helps them out. And it's a good first step, but I don't think it's enough.
So what more needs to be done?
Well, I mean, I think obviously, yeah, this covers people whose jobs have been closed by closed by law. But how does it help out self-employed people who may not have been eligible for furlough payment, but now desperately need money after going for months without work? I think I saw on Newsnight the other night a man who was his job. He was, I think, was he a window installer, something like that. He was on Newsnight, businesses just dried up over lockdown. Technically, he's not been on furlough. He's self-employed. He's not able to get any kind of real money in, and people like that need help.
God, imagine staying up late enough to watch Newsnight. Something like, what, 10:45, is it? Noah, hearing that from Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, who, as Enoch says, hasn't had the best week, is he doing enough by saying, if you're forced to close, we're going to cover 2/3?
Well, I suppose so, but I mean, I really think that these local lockdowns and the shutting of restaurants and pubs shouldn't take place. I just come from a perspective of thinking it's not sustainable for people, whatever country you're in, to constantly go in or out of lockdown. You know, we might be animals, but we're not the sort who hibernate for 3 months every year. So I don't think this government scheme, which forces, these closures of these pubs and restaurants, is the right way forward. I think what it should be about is, also we saw in August people were encouraged to go to restaurants, but really trying to protect those that are vulnerable and those that have got health conditions, but otherwise encouraging people to live as normal lives as you possibly can. So sure, the support for businesses is great, but that won't save, the support for employees is great, but that won't save all businesses, because they rely on money coming in, and people aren't going to be able to come in if these restaurants and other hospitality venues are forced to shut. So I don't think it's the right move forward in the first place.
Okay, and then Imogen, I'm aware, again, you're probably just finding out about this as I tell you it, that Rishi Sunak has said really he's going to give some help, as we see the furlough scheme end this month, some help to those industries forced to close. Do you think that's good?
Obviously, any level of help will be better than nothing. I think that giving it to the businesses that are forced to shut is obviously a good thing. But then there are still the businesses which can be open, which are struggling massively, especially like in the arts as well. And the businesses that weren't able to benefit from furlough because they hadn't been running long enough to have the necessary paperwork, they're still in big need of help.
The arts in particular has been speaking a lot this week, because there was this tweet that ITV News put out after an interview with Rishi Sunak, and they had essentially misquoted him. And he had said, according to this tweet, that if you work in the arts, you should retrain and get a different job. Now, they clarified this. That's not what he said. And Rishi Sunak has taken quite a lot of flack for it, because, as always, people see the original tweet, but they don't see the correction. Noah, coming to you, do you think brand Rishi is falling apart?
I mean, I never sort of backed brand Rishi in the first place.
Why?
I always thought it was bizarre when you had these chains like Wetherspoons or other pub restaurants are available, but saying it was Rishi's Eat Out to help out, as if the government were being very kind and altruistic and paying for 50% of your meal throughout August. Well, people would forget that actually the government haven't got any money. It would be the taxpayer that would be paying for that. It would be all of those who do pay taxes would be paying it back over sort of decades and over generations. So I never bought into the whole Rishi or Chancellor brand. I think you should be looking at the government as a whole rather than an individual. And while the government did take some good steps with regards to letting restaurants open as takeaways during the height of the pandemic and having that furlough scheme available, I think actually this whole sort of worshipping of one person isn't helpful for government scrutiny.
They were calling the meals Rishi Dishes. I mean, you've got to love that.
No.
Okay. Enoch,
Yeah.
Rishi Sunak at one point some months ago was the most popular politician in the country. You could argue he's the most popular and most sort of widely recognised chancellor in a very long time. Do you think that his empire of popularity is tumbling down?
Well, I mean, it's easy to be popular when you say, I'm going to give you lots of money. It's very hard to be popular when you say, we need to cut benefits and cut off spending. Rishi Sunak, he had a relatively, I won't say easy position, but he came into office a chancellor backed by Boris, who wants to become a new big spending Tory, faced with a crisis that he could actually just solve by throwing money at it. But as we approach him the year, we're hearing the same rumbles of we need to cut spending, throw backbenchers that aren't happy with Boris as they were, that will be permissive towards this, money just being thrown out everywhere. And Rishi himself doesn't seem happy to do it either. So I think once he has to come up with the hard realities of being I don't want to say an austerity chancellor because I feel like it's very misleading. When someone has to say, okay, we need to cut spending, to scale back what to bring out, he's going to see that popularity start to dip down a bit.
I'll tell you what I think is so remarkable is how much of an unknown he was when he became chancellor in, I think it was February. And he replaced Sajid Javid, who stepped down in a big shock. And he was the chief secretary to the Treasury, which is sort of deputy chancellor, so it makes sense. Yeah. But he wasn't necessarily a big name. I think politicos may well have known who he was, but a lot of people wouldn't. What a day! I'm just sort of thinking about when Sajid Javid resigned.
Yeah, I didn't even know who he was. I remember I was hosting. It was Have I Got Raw News for You back when that was a show. I was hosting because I think Lucy was off doing something. And we just got the news as the show started. Sajid Javid resigned. And I was like, can anybody find out who's replaced him? And nobody could for like a good hour until like the end of the show. And someone was like, oh, it's Rishi Sunak. We just didn't know who it was. We just absolutely confused as to who the chancellor was.
Do you know what? I was at work and it must have been in reading week. And I've been out all morning like working and speaking to people and stuff. And I came back and I knew it was the cabinet reshuffle day. But my phone, just as I went into the radio studio to talk all about it, my phone wasn't connecting to the internet. So I thought, oh, what a nightmare. Anyway, I've still got plenty to talk about, but I can't necessarily get the latest news. And I spoke about, I didn't know that Sajid Javid was going to resign. And just as I step out of the studio, it must have been about 1 o'clock. And the news headlines came in. It was the top story. And I thought, oh, how have I missed this? It was seconds. And I'll tell you what happens is because my phone didn't have the internet, I went on afterwards. I had a text from someone who worked there saying, Sajid out, Rishi in. And I didn't see it. And it is the most heartbreaking moment of my life. Anyway, that's enough about me. Imogen, brand Rishi, did you buy into it?
I think the Eat Out to Help Out definitely helped. But then I think following that, a lot of young people got the blame for going out and making the most of it. So I think it sort of came with a benefit and then an insult at the end. So it had a pro and a con completely.
Noah, I want to just quickly ask you something about something completely different because I know you'll be clued up on it. Talking of Rishi Sunak and his brand, his former director of strategic communications, Allegra Stratton, his former journalist, worked at BBC, ITV, all sorts of places. Most well known probably recently for being the co-host of the Peston on Sunday show when it launched, sort of the ITV's Chancellor Andrew Marr show. She went off to work for Rishi Sunak, looking after his brand. And I'll tell you what, from a fairly objective point of view, she's done quite a good job at getting him to become such a big name. And as you spoke about sort of, Rishi's Eat Out to Help Out and all this, they're obviously done a pretty good job from that side of getting his name out there. She's now going to be, Allegra Stratton, the host of the daily sort of Americanized government briefings. And these are going to be taken on the telly. We think journalists can ask lots of questions. Do you think she's a good choice for the role?
I mean, it shouldn't have been a huge surprise, really. As you say, Allegra Stratton had done, a brilliant job for Rishi Sunak's PR, even if people like me weren't fully convinced. But I think it'll be fascinating to see how these daily evening briefings work out, because currently political journalists are a part of, it's called the lobby, so they can ask questions to the Prime Minister's official spokesperson, who's never named, once in the morning and once in the evening. And so basically the evening segment of that will now be televised across the country. And what I think will be really interesting is whether organisations like the BBC News Channel and Sky News choose to cover the briefing, because you can have it could be on the Number 10 government website, but if media organisations feel that they're not being allowed to properly scrutinise the spokesperson, it's just a way for the government to spread their propaganda without accountability, then they might choose not to cover it. So I think it has potential to work very well. As you say, it's clear that they're trying to mirror what happens in the United States, where all the lobby journalists get there, and that is very much clicked onto Twitter. A visual aspect of it is very made very clear. But whether these news organisations will choose to cover it in the same way and have it run it on their breaking news will depend on whether there's that accountability and whether they can get follow-up questions, which I certainly hope they can.
And I think they'll cover it at the start, but then if they realise that then their questions aren't being answered or they're not getting the right level of coverage, maybe they'll pull it away. So I think I probably do see them doing it. It's just whether people are going to watch it. And the other thing is, am I right in thinking Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, is going to start his own
I think he's going to do it sort of every monthly.
I think you're right. Monthly. Enoch?
Yeah, I think that's the current plan. Keir Starmer's going to have his own press briefings, sort of opposition voice on. I think it's on the BBC every month, where he's going to bring up different members of the Sabbath cabinet with him to introduce them to the public and that sort of thing.
And I'm sure he'll go there and saying, I support the government, but, and then tell us why he doesn't support the government. Let's talk about something else, still linking to the government, the test and trace fiasco. Let's call it that. I could say different words. There's been some issues, let's just say, with the test and trace system from the very start. When it first started, they employed thousands of people who didn't have any work to do. Then they were going to give us an app, and then we didn't get the app, and then we didn't get the app again, and now we finally got the app, but it sends false notifications out all the time, which is really quite worrying. And then they lost loads of data. They lost, I think it was 12,000 cases because they were using an outdated Excel spreadsheet. That's a bit of an outline of it, Enoch, but really there's been some problems.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think it's hard to describe. I don't know how to use the word omni-shambles. The word omni-shambles often gets used too much, but there's nothing else you can use to describe the government's handling, testing, and tracing as an omni-shambles. All the way back when Matt Hancock made his first proposals of saying we're going to reach 200,000 tests a day, and then it turns out they were misadding the numbers to try and fudge it when they reach that final goal. So every time that sort of came back in the news, failed again, was buried somewhere, and then they kept digging out, really beating that dead horse. I'm just tired of it, to be honest. I'm tired of every time the government is like, oh, we finally cracked it, test and trace with a world-beating system. And if you look at places like Germany or South Korea or New Zealand, for example, where the test and trace system there is so accurate now, they actually managed to trace an outbreak of coronavirus to a door handle. That's how precise they have it now. It's just hard. It's deeply depressing that Britain can't crack this. I don't see why we can't do it.
Oh, Enoch, they're doing their best.
I'm sick of, honestly, I feel like Boris Johnson the government uses the phrase doing their best to say what I did every time I failed an exam in year 9. You can't keep using it. Eventually you have to do better, otherwise it doesn't count.
Okay. Imogen, do you think the government is doing all it can to test and to trace and to track and all these T words? Do you think they're doing enough, or is their best just not good enough?
I think they could have done better in the past to then make it better now. I think the lack of tests has caused so many problems, and even now there still aren't really enough. So the tracing part can't work in hand with the testing when they're just not available.
But do you think that they should be doing more? And if so, what should they be doing?
I think more tests should be available so that then it's not just if you show symptoms, because so many are asymptomatic that they're just spreading it around. And also the delay in testing, and that the incubation period of 5 days means that you can test negative even though you actually are positive. It just doesn't show up on the test straight away.
And in terms of this issue at the start of the week where they lost all these thousands of cases by using an outdated Excel spreadsheet, would you expect a big company, corporate company that we've spent a lot of money on, Serco, to be using more than an Excel spreadsheet?
Absolutely not. I think the resources that are available to them means that there just shouldn't be any mess up, especially on that scale as well.
Okay, pretty damning words there from Imogen. Noah, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's initially a really worthy ideal from the government to try and have an effective test and trace system, because that would allow, some element of normality to return, not be in lockdown, but at the same time being aware as to whether you tested positive or whether one of your contacts has tested positive. And so personally, like quarantining for 14 days or however long, rather than the whole country having to. But you can have a worthy ideal and it can be executed shambolically, which has clearly been the case here from this app initially, which I remember it was trialed in the Isle of Wight and didn't seem to properly work. And I remember especially the app that was really important about the level of privacy it allowed for, and whether it was, what was it looking into. We simply just didn't know. There wasn't, those questions just weren't answered. And clearly, we're talking about the Excel spreadsheet sort of fiasco, and you think that there those that are in power would have access to technology that was more suitable than that. I think also there's a bit of confusion over like what is the responsibility of the government and what's the responsibility of organisations like Public Health England, which we know Matt Hancock has said he's going to scrap, but that sort of compartmentalisation of the NHS meant it's unclear what the health secretary actually has power over and what they're just out of the loop about as we are, because it's some other body within the NHS that's sorting it out. So clearly the ideal of it is effective, but the execution just hasn't worked out, and it's a shame because in many other countries, as Enoch was saying, it's been far more effective.
Now I've got this app, and I imagine, just by show of a nod, I imagine you probably all have the app. Yeah, okay. I have had now this week 2 notifications telling me I have had exposure to coronavirus. Now, when you see these notifications, you get quite the shock. You think, right, 14 days, here it is, let's get the snacks in. And then you click on it, and it leads you to nowhere on this app. And I'm like, what should I do? Do I isolate? Do I call the NHS? I know they're under pressure. Do I ignore it? Because it's not a legal obligation to isolate if you're told to by the app. And then I Google it, and I realize loads of people have had these false exposure notifications. Anyone had these?
Yeah, I had one last week.
Imogen, you have. What did you think when you saw the notification? And what did you do?
It was just one of those, here we go, 2 weeks in the flat. And then I clicked on it, and again, like you said, it just sort of led to nothing. And so I thought, well, it can't be that serious. Maybe someone just around had it. So it's confusing, and I think for anyone who hadn't researched it before would think, I've got to isolate, I've got to go to get a test, and the stress it must cause must be horrible for someone.
And especially if you are of sort of our generation of being quite comfortable with technology and comfortable with researching this, and then I got on Twitter and I realized loads of people have had it, and I think, oh, I'm less worried. If you perhaps are older and have a smartphone and you've downloaded it because you want to help people and save lives and protect the NHS and control the virus or whatever slogan it's out, then you might have a real shock. Enoch, you've said you've also got this notification. What happened when you got it?
Well, I think it's just actually, what made it worse was me and all my flatmates got it at the same time. So we were, we actually have been exposed to someone. We immediately clicked on it, and it was just nothing. As I said, nothing came up. And I went online and I checked, and I saw all these. Oh, don't worry, it's just flagging it up. But the thing is, I think it does make me actually quite. I said I was tired earlier, but tired's the wrong word. I'm angry. I'm absolutely furious at this government that they've completely failed on this test and trace system. They've built an app that's just not fit for purpose at all. They've built a system into that app that actively makes. Actually undermines faith in the app, which puts everyone in more danger. Everything about this government almost feels like Occam's razor suggests they are just stupid and it's not malicious, but every day I become slightly more convinced that someone up there has to just hate everyone in the UK. That's the only way to explain the multitude of complete ineptitude we've seen from them.
Enoch, I didn't think you were allowed any opinions as the head of news.
Well, that's my only one. I've gone all out now. If that's it, after this, I'm fine.
Wow. Well, there's our clip to put on Twitter afterwards. Noah, respond to what you just heard from Enoch.
Well, yeah, certainly forceful would be the word. I think the people I really feel sorry for about these false notifications are, as you say, older generations who may have had, family members around to help install the app and have got it on their phone or iPad, and that would take what they see there as face value because you think, it's an NHS app and there's such a great deal of support for the NHS across the country. It is almost like a religion. And so you would take what you'd seen as, as gospel. You'd think it was correct. And so to know that actually it's just completely bogus, while younger people can just easily go on Twitter and find out that it is. For an older person, you would just be really paranoid, and that's on top of all the other issues an older person might be facing. Like they might still be shielding, they might be in a quarantine, the different sort of social events they may have enjoyed during their retirement would have all been cancelled. So I think that real social isolation, which although it can easily affect everyone regardless of age, I think for older people especially, if you've got other sort of health conditions, it is a real it's really, really worrying. And I think that app fiasco only adds to it. It's shameful.
and we can cross live to Enoch, who is typing out his resignation statement. As we speak. Enoch, I love it. Okay, we're at 10 to 4. That is the time. You're watching the Johnny Jenkins Show. And if you've got thoughts, if you've got opinions, maybe you've just got something you need to get off your chest, a little bit like our head of news there, then you comment it down below. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, that's where we're live at the moment. And if you're not watching with us live, and maybe you're watching later in the day or another day, then I'd still like to see your thoughts. You can still put them down below. Don't you worry if you're not with us live. But, well, there's the siren. Can you hear it? Do you know, I hear so many sirens where I am. I'm near some police fire station, or I don't know. I hear them a lot, and they're very distracting, as you can tell. Let's move on to our final topic in our final 10 minutes about these new measures, which I think we expect to see on Monday. We had measures introduced by Nicola Sturgeon earlier this week in Scotland, who in the sort of central belt of Scotland, closed pubs and restaurants for 16 days. This circuit breaker to try and stop the spread of the virus. Short, sharp lockdown, get it done with. Cases will be significantly lower. Let's start with Scotland, and then we move to England after that. Noah, do you think Nicola Sturgeon is right to introduce these measures in Scotland?
No, I really don't. I don't think, as I said earlier, that pubs, restaurants, and these other hospitality venues should have to shut. I think it's a real disaster to keep going in and out of some form of lockdown. And the thing is, I mean, I'm not an epidemiologist, so, you know, I'm not obviously an expert on the scientific matter of these things, but you might see cases temporarily going down, and then as soon as they're allowed to reopen again after 16 days, cases going up again. Well, what do? Do you shut them again? Well, you just can't keep going in and out of some form of lockdown. And I've sort of was doing some research, and of course the rising number of coronavirus cases worrying, but you have to remember it's because we're testing more, so it's a double-edged sword. It's worrying that the cases are rising, but also it's a recognition that our testing capacity and the number of tests we're actually doing has increased a lot. And it's the idea of, if we had the testing capacity that we have now, if we had that in March and April, the number of daily cases would be so much higher than they actually were. So I think it is just unsustainable from an economic perspective. However much support the government provide, it won't be enough, and they need to have money coming in from customers. And from a social perspective, I think it's a disaster. And from a health perspective too, when you think of all the non-COVID issues and the mental health issues that have just been completely neglected. So I think both the Scottish and UK government are just so wrong with the actions they're taking.
What should they be doing then?
Well, I think it should be really about mass testing. I think all the former UK Prime Ministers have endorsed mass testing where possible, trying to get test and trace working, so it's individuals that have to quarantine where possible rather than organisations. But again, you're not going to quarantine if you're in an insecure job where your pay isn't guaranteed. So I think they should be always guaranteeing pay in that way, or if they can't do that, making universal credit more generous. And that's something I wrote an article about for Perspectives, which you can read at all good internet connections. So making universal credit more generous, I think that's what should happen, rather than simply forcing a mandatory shutdown, which you're just going to have to do it again and again, because you'll see cases rise when the shutdown ends.
Perspectives.news, that's the place to be to find Noah's article on universal credit. Full disclosure, I'm one of the editors of Perspectives. Imogen, looking up to Scotland, do you think they are taking the right actions?
In terms of pubs and hospitality sectors, I don't think the early curfews and then closing actually help, because at least when they're open, people are restricted to a table of 6, and it can be enforced, whilst closing them and having the curfews and things just causes mass gatherings outside, which are harder to control, and people just congregate in homes, even being told that they're not meant to. They still do, because they don't want to be isolated and they want to carry on with their lives. So I think it's better to, 1, stay open for the economy, and 2, because it's easier to monitor what people are doing.
I suppose the argument is that people are still going to drink. They either do it in a COVID secure way in a pub, or they do it at home in a less secure way. Enoch, is Nicola Sturgeon taking the right actions to try and stop the spread?
No, I think I think she's made the wrong call here, but I can't almost blame her for it, because we're seeing the exact same wrong calls being made in Westminster and in Wales. I think the government's they spent so long convincing themselves everything's going to be all right now. We can start letting people back out. They put out all this messaging saying everyone can return to normal. Now they're seeing cases rise again, and they are panicking. They are absolutely panicking to see if they can do anything to try and at least make it look like they're trying to suppress cases, even if it's not actually suppressing them. I mean, we know the fact that the 10 p.m. curfew only came about not because it was basically scientific evidence, but because the government, Boris Johnson, wanted to make it look like he was doing something, but he couldn't commit to the full 2-week lockdown as scientists wanted. Nicholas, I think there's the exact same rule. I mean, I think it was announced yesterday that pubs don't actually have, or CAFTA don't have that CAFTA were originally excluded, don't have to shut down, even if they have a drinking license. All they have to do is not serve alcohol, which I think sort of gets around. I think it's just a fundamental way of the government's gutting businesses, putting the responsibility on them to stop the spread of coronavirus, and not doing it in a way that means they have to support them, which I think is absolutely shameful.
Yeah, lemonades and cokes all round, and then you might be able to be there. They did say, though, Enoch, and when I say they, I mean governments of all shapes and sizes and parties, they did say, well, look, we're going to give you some freedoms back. Freedom-loving nation, all this. We're going to give you some freedoms back. But if the virus rate goes up, we'll take them back. They're sticking to their word.
Well, I think the crucial problem is, if the government came out tomorrow and they said, we have to do another shutdown, we weren't ready, we weren't prepared, I'd be like, all right, fine. That makes sense to me. I've seen enough of the failure to be like, that's acceptable. I wouldn't be happy about it, but I could accept it. I think the problem is the government spent so long beating the drum of everything's going to be fine now. Let's get back into the office. Everyone start going to buy Pret again. It's what we need to do to save the economy. And then it's almost like there's a surprise Pikachu face when they realize, oh, that means cases are going to rise. We need to start showing everyone back inside. We need to start locking everything down again. I think it's too haphazard to have any real proper effect.
Okay, well, they're the thoughts on Scotland, and in the final few minutes, I want to turn to England, because in many of the regional lockdown areas, restrictions have been curbed, but actually maybe we see more coming in on Monday, a similar sort of Scotland-style lockdown on pubs and alcohol venues. Noah, what do you think the government should announce on Monday? Because it seems pretty clear now they're going to say something.
It does seem they feel they have to be seen to be doing something. Like when Imogen was talking about the 10 p.m. curfew, it was so the government could feel that they were acting in a way, even though that's been debunked because of the large gatherings. And there seem to be rumours in all the papers about there being, pubs and restaurants having to shut. It's almost like where Scotland leads, England follows. And again, I don't think that is the right move. Ironically, in many of the places that have seen local lockdowns, you've actually seen the number of cases going up. So it's clear that they haven't been effective at all. The first lockdown back in March, the most severe version, was because we didn't know how serious COVID-19 was going to be and how fatal it was going to be. And clearly, while there have been numerous excess deaths and the human cost of coronavirus has been truly awful, we know that it affects most people in quite a mild way, even though many that do survive get chronic COVID or long COVID. So even if they've survived, they still feel the effects of it. So that was the reason for the first lockdown. I just don't think there is a justification for another lockdown, and that these businesses, which are already really, really struggling, shouldn't be made to suffer further by government. Now, of course, people, if they're quarantining or don't feel safe going to the pubs or whatever, just naturally won't go out of their own choice. But I don't think the government should be imposing that. I think they should be focusing on their testing regime and ensuring that those that are vulnerable, like in care homes, receive the support they need.
Imogen, cases are rising. The government's got to do something. Maybe this sort of lockdown is essential.
I don't think shutting down like pubs and restaurants work, because people just congregate in different ways. I think allowing people to work from home if they can, or studying from home if they can, will be more beneficial, especially because then people aren't being forced to go to work if they don't feel safe, whilst it's such an option to go out to restaurants and hospitality. So I think it's better to change the restrictions rather than impose more.
Enoch, I grant you 30 seconds to tell us your thoughts before we call time.
Regional lockdowns don't work. The government knows they don't work. We all know they don't work. They'll continue to happen because the government needs to look like it's doing something. Mass testing is the only way this is going to work.
There we are. He did it in under 30 seconds. We love it. Fighting talk from all three panelists today, and I'm very pleased that you decided to spend your Friday afternoon with me, Enoch, Imogen, Noah. Thanks ever so much. See you soon. Have a lovely weekend.
Thank you very much.
And you'll all be welcome on the show. in the near future. Thank you for watching. Here we are, nearly 4 o'clock on the Johnny Jenkins Show. If you want to get involved with Raw, maybe you're a first year, or maybe you just want to try something new this year, then follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and search for that group on Facebook, Raw 2020-2021. And you can, of course, get your membership on the SU website. Have a lovely weekend, whatever you're getting up to, enjoying your freedoms if you've got them for the final few days. And we'll be back next Friday, 3 o'clock. Hope to see you then.